Hi everyone, Steve from the Audiophiles. Welcome to another amazing episode. I'm here at Vinyl Records in Vancouver, 44 Water Street, for an incredible conversation with mastering engineer Bernie Grundman. You'll get to listen to that interview or watch that interview. So guys, if you haven't, subscribe to my channel below. Click on that button if you want to see more, great interviews, great stuff from my channel. Please subscribe, helps me out a lot. And please enjoy my conversation with Bernie Grundman. All right, well, Bernie, thank you so much for joining me today. This is my YouTube channel called The Audiophiles. More than appreciative of this. I'm here in Vancouver at my friend's record store called Vinyl Records at 44 Water. Again, thank you for doing this. And again, I wanted to know, what is mastering? What do you consider mastering, or how would you define mastering?
Well, that's a question that everybody asks, like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Sometimes it really comes out great. There's a lot of inconsistency in a lot of recordings, especially in albums and so forth. And we're kind of like, I call it the sobering part of the business, in that it's the place you get to as a producer and as an artist, and after you've recorded and spent all that time in the studio, you get down to what mastering is. And mastering is like really getting down to the reality of how does this thing really stack up next to everything else that's out there. Because we've been in the studio for months only listening to our stuff, and everybody that walks in the room, we turn the level up. So we think we've got the greatest thing in the world, because if you listen to something loud, you tend to get a kinetic kind of thing, and you think it's better maybe than it really is. You don't know.
Right.
So that's why I call it the sobering part. It's like they come in here and they're pretty humble, and they go, God, what do we really have? And they know that I don't know their stuff. I've never heard it before, and I'm going to be hearing it for the first time. And I'm going to be bringing to it my experience of everything else that I've done like theirs. So, and I've probably heard some of the best of any type of music because I've been in it so long, 55 years now. And,
oh, wow.
And so even in my seminars, I talk about this. I talk to a lot of these new engineers, and I said, look, you've got to develop this. And it doesn't mean that you can't do it. It just means that you need to spend a lot of time listening and hearing, and also not being prejudiced also. You've got to be able to open yourself up emotionally to anything, any kind of music, because it's all the same thing. And it's all like an emotional, human expression of our life, of the way we all live. We all have the same emotions. So polka music is similar. It could be that. It could be Hawaiian. It doesn't matter. It's their point of view of how to portray the same thing that somebody else is portraying. There's different ways of different types of music, different ways of portraying things. Some people do it better than others, but it still comes down to that basic fundamental thing. It's an emotional expression of the human experience. So I need to, look, I was this bebop beatnik guy. I had even an after-hours jazz club when I was 19 in Phoenix, and I hung out with all the musicians in town and all that. And I was a snob, bebop, jazz, hey, it was cool, everything that, and even classical too. Like this is the real stuff. Well, and of course, when you're a teenager, you know everything. So I've had to learn myself to open myself up emotionally to anything that comes in the room, and try to connect with it emotionally, because how would I know what to do? How would I know what knob to twist? Is it just me making it loud? A lot of people almost think that, because when it comes back from a mastering place, they make it loud.
Right.
Well, that's the highly simplified view of what it really is. What you really want to do is help that music connect emotionally with the listener. And you're only going to know if it is going to connect emotionally with the listener if you use yourself. So whenever I turn a knob or anything, I have to have a feeling of whether or not it's doing anything beneficial or effective for that music. Now, it isn't that I'm taking it in the direction that the artist or the producer wanted it to go in. It might be valid, but it might not be quite the feeling they're looking for. It's a joint effort. This kind of thing has a lot to do with, I have ideas because I've
Yeah.
heard some of the best of any of what they're bringing in. And I'm trying to bring it up to that level of effectiveness.
So would you work with the producers as well when you're cutting the album, like closely, like they would be in the studio?
Oh yeah, yeah. They
Mhm.
come in. The artist sometimes in, also the producer, the engineer. It's more intimate, of course, than in the
Right.
studio because it's just one or two or all three of them. But it's usually about that far. You know, it's only the principal people.
Okay.
So I can get feedback from them. Now, because of the pandemic and all of that stuff, we haven't allowed people to attend sessions. So they send their files in, and we do what we think is going to work, and then we send them a test. So it's always a trial and error thing. It's just like mixing. You know, it's like you know, it's hard to get to the point where you think you've done everything possible to access this piece of music and make it connect the way it should, or way it could, put it that way, the way it could. So you know, it's very hard to put your finger on when you've reached that point. That's why sometimes these mixes go on and on and on, because they keep thinking, well, is there anything else we can try? Can we make it even more effective? Can we? And they keep thinking maybe there's more we can do, and you trial and error.
Yeah.
So that's why it takes months and months and months a lot of times to do some of these albums and so forth. So, and not for mastering. Mastering, probably the longest I've ever gone is maybe off and on, maybe 3 months.
And that's what I was going to ask you that as well. Let's say, for instance, I know you did the Pink Floyd remastering. So Dark Side of the Moon, how long would that have taken you to remaster from the time? Because you guys use the analog tapes, I believe, for that one.
Well, not exactly. No. I wasn't really, you know, in a way, I'm not the mastering engineer on that.
Okay.
I'm the James Guthrie is
Right.
really the guy that's
Okay.
sending me files. They're 192 sampling rate files that very high resolution files. And what all we're doing is we're trying to transfer it faithfully to the lacquer. Now, we have a very hot rodded custom cutting system that we have many different signal paths to accommodate anything. And our primary thing is to, wherever we can, keep it to the highest quality. We don't want to interfere with the source as far as quality. We might want to adjust the balance and so forth of the spectrum, do EQ or whatever it might be. And then when we do that like we have a very handmade console too, where we only use the frequencies that we're using, or the bands that we're using. That's the only thing that's in the circuit. So we don't like to interfere with the quality, because once you lose quality, you'll never get it back. So so that's part of what we try to do. So like in that case, that was done from these 192 files. It went direct, without any console, without any level adjustment, without anything, direct to the cutting system.
Interesting.
Which is also most of it's all built by us too. So like we're old school that way. You know, we grew up tinkering and changing things and doing things that a lot of people don't do anymore. They just buy maybe a turnkey cutting system, and that's it. You know, they just, whatever the factory or whatever the company that makes it, however they set it up. We do a lot more than that.
Well, that brings me to my next question. I was going to ask you, like, what type of equipment do you use in the mastering process? I'm sure my viewers would love to know about that.
Well, like I said, it's custom made. The cutting amplifier and the preamp and the feedback circuitry and all this stuff that you need for cutting. And the cutter head is it's actually also been modified a lot too. And it also has, we're using a diamond cutting tool. which is kind of a newer development because it's always been difficult to use diamonds as a cutting tool or a stylus, because lacquer, when you're cutting lacquer, which we cut into, that's the master, is lacquer on an aluminum substrate. The lacquer tends to develop a static charge with the diamond. And so up to this point, up to it's been about a year now, year and a half, but up to that, we were always using a industrial sapphire or ruby cutting tool, which they don't last as long, of course, but they're good. They're certainly good, but it's a whole other level of quality with the diamond one. Now we've figured out a suction system and a way of getting the chip away from the cutting tool, so that we can cut now with this diamond tool. It's made in France. It's made in Western France. This one guy is pretty fanatic character, but we need those people.
How long will this diamond last for before you have to replace it?
About 600 hours.
Oh, wow. And so how many lacquers would that be altogether?
Oh, well, yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
because they run anywhere, it depends on album lengths. We go up to 34 minutes a side, which is really unheard of in a way.
Well, and I was going to ask you that too. Is that one of the toughest things as a mastering engineer? Like basically like the length of a side of an album? Is that tough for you guys?
Well, yes, because when you think about it, what we're really cutting into the record is a miniaturization of what the signal is. It's analog. It's pure analog. And so if you're going to cut it loud, it's going to take more space. The groove is going to move more. So like the thing that's easiest to see are low frequencies, because there's so long wavelengths. So if there's a kick drum, like a hip hop record, you look under the microscope and you see the groove jumping from left to right, usually laterally, because they like to center it so that you get both woofers working on the bottom end, because it's an important part of it. Now, other records, like a lot of jazz records, they might have the bass way on the left side or the right side, and so now you're going to have only one groove wall that's moving laterally. So, but it's when you think about it, the whole thing is a combination of a vertical as well as lateral movement in the groove. That's why you really need a pretty good cartridge to get everything out of that groove, because it's a pretty complex signal in there. And especially with high frequencies that are very, very fast movements, the transients and so forth. So if you don't have a good cartridge, you're not going to really get the detail and cleanliness of the high end as well as you could if you had a more expensive one. You just need that compliance in the playback. We can put it in the groove. It's just that it's playing it back is what's difficult. And there's some inherent problems with vinyl because it goes all the way back to Edison. So it's pretty primitive, the basic principle. Of course, nowadays we have full frequency response. We have 2 channels in one groove. And so it's come a long way, but I don't know if we can go much further, because it is a format that you can't completely change, because one inherent problem that discs have is that the linear speed changes. So on the outer edge of the disc, it's going 4 times the speed as toward the label. So because of that, the density increases for each revolution. So if you take the same signal on the outer revolution or an inner revolution, and if you did this one, your playback played just the outside cut and then the inside cut, you'd hear the difference in quality. The high end isn't quite as good.
So the inner groove distortion is definitely something that happens.
Oh, absolutely. And it's there even if it sounds like it's clean. It's not going to be as good as it would be if it was on the outer edge of the disc.
So is that something
can't change?
And I was going to say, so that's something you obviously recognize, but you can't really do much about. So you just have to be cognizant of it, though.
Yeah. So that's why a lot of these audiophile records are on 4 sides at 45 RPM.
Right.
The faster it goes, the better. The signal is spread out.
Wider grooves.
And And it doesn't even mean, it has nothing to do with the depth.
Mhm.
It has to do with the high frequencies on the edges of the groove walls that are being, like an accordion, expanded out, pulled apart, so that the stylus can get in and out of that little indentation perfectly. So so that's why the audiophiles do that. And it does make a difference. And we don't go in right all the way to the label
Right.
on a 45. So it's all done for quality, trying to capture and give the listener the best experience of the music. So you can go way out. You can go to that one-step process. You can do all of
Yep.
this kind of stuff, which is better.
Yep.
I've heard it. It's better. We've compared it. We've even made special test cuts and sent them over to the factory, and they've made test pressings of things that are 3-step and ones that are 1-step, and the 1-step is better. So all of this stuff, it seems like any kind of processing, any kind of generations, even mechanical, like on a disc, is going to affect the sound. It's not going to be quite as good. So, and it's true with anything. It's true with, as good as digital, they promised it would be so perfect. Well, it's far from perfect. Digital has a lot of problems. It's like Joe Massenburg said, he's a very famous guy that developed a lot of equipment and so forth, big mixer. He said, the problem with digital is that it's not just one thing, it's 10 things that need to be improved, Yeah, and it's not that it isn't good, it's good, but anytime you do a lot of processing, like conversions into another language, and then back to analog, and all of this kind of processing, it's not so much the fault of the digital, it's the fault of all this electronics that's involved in doing that. Whereas if you get, say, a really good sounding original, like analog tape, and you cut a disc on that without any conversions, nothing, just going right from that to the disc, you're gonna have a better, cleaner sound.
So what would be your favorite Bernie Grundman mastered album, the best sounding one in your opinion? I mean, you've done 18,000 plus of them, so I can't imagine you remember all of them.
Yeah, well, it's kind of hard to say, but a lot of the stuff I did way back actually is some of the best, because I started in Hollywood at Contemporary, which is very famous for quality because of the way they did things direct to 2-track. Like the Sonny Rollins Way Out West album.
Okay.
Which is very impressive, the sound. And it's, to this day, is one of the audiophiles' favorites. So, I mean, for pop music, I think Asia was really impressive.
Okay.
I think that was a very impressive album doing that. And actually, some of the, like, I know Thriller's Michael's biggest album.
Yep.
But Off the Wall is a better sounding album.
Interesting.
So, and it's interesting too, there are reasons for that too. And there are inherent reasons in that they used 1/4-inch tape on that, on Off the Wall, but the Thriller was on 1/2-inch tape. And there's even a difference there. 1/2-inch doesn't sound the same as 1/4-inch. 1/4-inch sounds more open and cleaner and a better sound. And there's some technical reasons why that's true, but it's not very American.
Would some of the old jazz,
the smaller tape is better.
would some of the old jazz titles have the 1/4 tape, or would they have been at the
They all
1/2-inch?
They all
Yeah,
have.
yeah. So
yeah,
that's why they sound so good.
Yeah, well, that's part of it. Yeah, that's part of it. And they're only 15 IPS. They're nothing fancy, but they were so direct. They were so, see, the problem is when you start putting it through consoles and all of these signal paths and so forth, and you run it into like a lot of tracks, that's all going to add up as just a form of distortion. The closer you can get to right off the microphones onto the tape, or even onto the computer, the cleaner and the better it's going to sound, more natural it's going to sound. Now we have to go through a lot of processes to even put out a CD. We have to put it on another computer. We have to put in all the ID points of where the tunes are so that you can access them on the CD. And so all of them don't sound as good as the original file that we have in our computer. when it comes back from the factory, when the CD comes back to the factory. They all go downhill. And the pressing does too. The lacquer, the lacquer that we make,
Yeah.
I could have you standing in front of the speakers. I could put on a very good tape or digital, anything, it doesn't matter. I can record it and I can play it back simultaneously because we have a calibration system right on the cutting system. We can listen back to something that's been just recorded the next a half revolution away, and I could A/B it and you wouldn't be able to tell the difference.
Amazing.
The cutting and the playback is so perfect.
Wow.
That it's almost impossible to tell the difference. That's how good it is. Now, when it comes back to the factory, you'll hear it.
Yeah.
It's not as good, but there are some pressing plants that are closer than others. So it's a moving target. All of this stuff is a big moving target. Certain pressing plants are just better than other ones, or more consistent. And that's the only thing I worry about is because it's so popular now that it tends to
Quality.
be less consistent, the quality.
Yeah.
Just the surfaces, the quietness of the surfaces.
Well, that brings me to, you got Analog Productions doing their Clarity vinyl.
Yeah.
You have, obviously, of course, you've got Craft Recording, doing their Neotech super vinyl along with mobile fidelity and their super vinyl. That is really making it sound incredible, like those compounds.
Oh no, now see, the audiophiles are the ones that really brought it back, started bringing it back in the mid 90s. I was doing all that stuff for Classic Records. I did like 400 or 500 albums for them. I did a lot of albums over a number of years.
And I saw another video that you did, and I didn't realize this. I think it was with Chad from Analog Productions that you Classic Records made you put the BG on the dead wax for the first time.
They probably did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I never really I thought about it that much, but they said, "Hey, put your initial on there." So on the one steps, I've been actually signing them.
I was going to ask you that. You don't really have like a little metal stamper. You stamp it, you actually sign it with your name.
No, I actually sign it with a straw. Yeah.
Interesting.
The lacquer is soft enough to where you use one of those scribes, and it's not a very good signature. It's not. I'm kind of sloppy anyway, but they know it's me.
Yeah. Well, I know. Seeing BG on the dead wax, means a lot to audiophiles, means a lot to the industry. We know it's a good, when you see that, it's a great sounding record. I really truly feel that way. You're an audiophile, and I was going to ask you this. Being an audiophile, what do you think of this whole, like, the master tape, using the analog tape versus digital to cut the record these days? Where's that going to go in the next 5 years? As we see tapes get older and degrading, what do you see happening in that realm?
Well, fortunately, the digital domain stuff has been actually improving through the years. And I used to complain a lot when it first even came out. I was saying, we can't even make a digital copy that's very good. But they were so bent on getting everyone to accept it that Sony wouldn't even talk to me.
Oh, wow.
I said, look, guys, I'm only trying to point out that you're not done. You've got work to do. And it's not that it's not a good idea. I think you can manipulate a lot of things. You can do a lot of things, especially with pop music, where you like to do a lot of that. You want to fix this or fix that. You can do it in the computer. The analog stuff that's going direct to tape, you can't do as much at all. You have to have a good performance right now.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's why it lends itself to jazz or classical much better in some ways. Pop music usually is a process where it's like a layer upon layer upon layer. So you've got lots of tracks and so forth, and a lot of kind of gimmicky things or whatever to keep people's attention. You have all this kind of other art form that enters into it. In other words, it's not all about just music, a lot of pop music. It's all about theatrics and things like that, just like you see on stage, that to help you feel that you're getting more than is really coming out of the music. They've got all these lights flashing, and they've got all these explosions and whatever. I don't know. It's not all about the music in pop music a lot of times. It is sometimes, of course, there are some great artists, but when it comes to jazz or classical, it's only about the music.
Right.
And the thing that's nice about jazz or classical or even some of this acoustical stuff that pop artists do with acoustical instruments, that's where the quality is. acoustical instruments have the richest sound. They have overtones, they have resonances that you can actually hear that if it's a good recording. You can hear all of the stuff that comes after the leading original note on an instrument. You can hear that trailing over the overtones and the resonances. And those are the things that start getting lost with digital. Those real small kind of like areas that you're not aware of that you're missing until you compare it to say something analog that was sent to the computer. You realize that, gee, you know, it sure sounded detailed, but you know, it sounds thinner now. It doesn't sound as full on the top end of all things. Think of it that way.
Okay.
I did those 75 albums for Blue Note on their 75th anniversary. And we were doing a lot of comparisons and trying to figure out how to do it because they wanted a 192 sampling rate transfers.
Right.
They wanted to do a lot of digital stuff at Capitol. I mean, I guess Don was in charge of that at Capitol. And we did a lot of tests, and we could hear the master tape. We'd send it to the computer, and we even had a special computer with our own power supplies and everything. And we went direct into the computer at 192. And no matter what we did, you would listen to the tape going into the computer, and then you play the computer back, and it just was not the same thing. It just, the size of it in the way it was, I don't know, it's almost like the notes contain a richer, fuller sound. Even though the digital one sounded more detailed, it's deceiving because it's missing stuff. That's what's wrong. It doesn't really capture a lot of, especially low level information like ambience.
Mm-hmm.
That's where digital has trouble. The lower the level, the worse it is. So you're using less and less bits. So all of this stuff comes into play. And it's not that there aren't some good digital recordings. I mean, there are some that's better than ever now, and we have better processors and better. So it is getting closer and closer, but it's really hard to capture some of this stuff that was done way back in the analog domain. It's hard to really capture it. But you know, we're always hoping.
So DSD is becoming more of an archival type of system now. Are you using more DSD in some of your cutting and mastering, or is it more PSM?
Well, we do it for the audiophile people like Acoustic Sounds, you know, that we do, and we're doing all this craft recording stuff and so forth. And so sometimes I know that Acoustic Sounds does have us do a DSD, but see, you have to be careful of these kind of things because, yeah, theoretically, a lot of these things should be actually, in a way, better than they really are when you finally get them. Mm-hmm. as a someone that buys music, because you don't know what it's gone through to get it to you. And big trick in all of this has always been, how do you get something mass produced that's going to bring to the lister what
the
you're
consistency
hearing in the studio?
You need the consistency to the mass producer, and that's what DSD would bring, correct?
Well, that's the problem. It might not, because see, not everybody does DSD, and a lot of times the guys that put it all together, it's going down generations. You know, when it's moving around, when it's going to a place that specializes in that, and then when it goes to whatever file it is, digital file it is, that's going to be downloaded from a company that does that work. So these are all digital copies. Now, the problem is you can't make a perfect digital copy. It never has happened. I've never heard it. And we even had the Pro Tools people come down here with all their test racks and all that kind of stuff years ago. And they because they were said, you can't tell the difference. You can't tell the difference. And we picked out the copy every time. And the guy went nuts. He says, I don't know what you're hearing. He says, but there's something going on here. I don't know. He was so upset. We said, look, I've never heard a copy that sounds as good as the original. It's just, it's simple as that. In fact, I've even had people come in where I've showed them right on the Pro Tools. I've got the Pro Tools, and the best copy is when you do it internally. So it's not going outside of the computer into another hard drive, and it's on and on and on and on and on. I did it inside the computer, just made a copy and had them lined up together. And this guy was a big digital guy. And I says, okay, look, I'll prove it to you. So listen to this. So I A-B'd, I could switch between the two tracks. And he heard it. And then he claimed that I was doing something wrong. I mean, hey, it's like a lot of things nowadays, isn't it? You might have a lot of proof, but they won't accept it. They think you did something, or you're covering up something, or you're,
the new world. It's a new world of social media. That's what happens, right? Everyone, everything's a conspiracy theory.
Oh God, So anyway, but and it's just like a lot of people will come in and they've got a new piece of equipment and they tell me, they say, this has got this and it's got this special power supply and it's got this and it's got this. And I says, don't tell me about how great it is. Let me hear it. That's all I want you. You don't need to tell me anything because it's not going to mean anything to me until I hear it. I have to be that judge. Yeah. I have to hear it because I don't care what it is. Yeah. I mean, I've seen two amplifiers that check out to their specs exactly the same and they sound entirely different. And let me point this out about that. When we do testing of equipment, we get an approximation of how good the circuitry is and so forth by harmonic distortion and intermodulation distortion. We only have a few little tools there to give us an idea of how it's handling things going through it and what it's doing to it and how much distortion is caused by, say, running two frequencies at the same time and whether it's keeping them separated and all of this stuff and all that, how well is it keeping the integrity of the signal as it's going through. But there is nothing that can tell us what music does because it's too complex. And when it gets complex, now you're running into way other problems that can occur, evidently, because you could put two amplifiers up that are supposed to sound the same. They check out the same, the distortion and everything, and they're that entirely different sounding on complex information. So the only way you're going to ever know anything is to use your ears. And that's what I tell all of these people in seminars. I said, look, you might be, some guy tells you this cable is great, fantastic. You got to compare it because it might not be as good. Look, let me tell you this. They do this to me all the time at the studio because I've got some pretty sharp people here. And, but they'll call me in and they'll say, okay, which one do you like? This one or this one? They put me on the spot, A-B comparison. I say, okay, all right, let me hear A, let me hear B. And I'll say, okay, I like A or whatever I like, and there was one not too long ago where it was pretty obvious, that the one was much more open, much nicer sound, it just was more comfortable to listen to, everything about it. And I said, okay, so what did you do? So the big connector, the big connector that goes into the computer, all he changed were the pins. That's it. That's it. Only the pins. And the new pins that were supposed to be better didn't sound as good. So, what are you going to do? You really can't believe anything that anyone tells you. You have to really be responsible for the equipment and the stuff you have around you, because that's going to be your sound. So if you're not really comparing things and making sure, because I have all kinds of people through the years that have come in and they said, well, we have a better equalizer. We have a great equalizer. And I'll put it up next to ours, the one that we hand build. It never beats ours. So I said, why would I want it? That's nice. And it sounds pretty good, but I don't want to start out behind the 8-ball without even equalizing. I wanted to go through my system and almost not be able to hear the difference. Then I'll manipulate the sound. But I don't care what it does to the sound on your manipulation. That's nice. But if you're ending up just going through it with a sound that's not as good as what you're sending it, why would I want it? Because now I won't even be able to overcome. I can only make an apparent difference now. It's already starting out not degraded. So these are all the kind of things that at least I'm involved in, and we're involved in here. We're very big on, we're old audiophile people, and and we're constantly comparing and testing and trying to come out with something that's even more and more accurate.
And that just reminded me of something, being an audiophile. I mean, you worked at A&M for years. A&M had, and you recall this, and I have a bunch of the A&M audiophile pressings that were made in Canada, or I guess pressed in Japan using JVC Super Vinyl. You had Super Tramp, I think The Police, bunch of different titles, and they were half-speed mastered. So what are your views today on the half-speed mastering process?
Well, you know, half-speed mastering was originally developed by Motown way back. Because they couldn't get high end on their discs. You know, here's the problem. And back then this was a problem, more of a problem than it is today. But the cutter heads, I mean, I'm not sure how many people are aware of this, but you know, all of these discs have an RIAA curve.
Right.
Okay, so that was developed in 1949. And it was done so that you could get more time on a record. It was done also so that you could cut at lower levels than 78s, also helping you get more time on the record. So what they did was they rolled off the bottom. So, and then they boosted the top in a very simple curve, a very wide band curve. So there's there's very little phase shift in something like that. So it doesn't interfere with the music so much. You know, the wider the curve, the less phase shift there is. So they developed this, and the reason why is bottom end takes up the most space. So they rolled that way off, and they boosted the top. Now the top is hard to cut though if you have a lot of information way up high, because now you're asking the amplifier to put out a lot of power because it's boosted. But when it plays back after it's pressed, when you have the reciprocal curve, you're taking down the noise of the vinyl as well. So you're pulling down, it's a noise reduction process. So, but what, let me put it this way, 15,000 cycles is up 17.3 dB. That's a huge boost if there's any information up there. So if you have a real bright, aggressive top end, like they were trying to put on Motown singles and stuff, it would blow the circuit breakers or the fuses in the cutting system, because and it wouldn't be clean. You know, it would be too much energy for the amplifiers and the cutter heads that were around in those days. It's different today. We have no trouble with top end, really. The biggest trouble is being able to track it on the playback. The cutting system can, because we're up around peak level, peak power of 800 watts or something in order to get a clean top end if we have much information up there. It's just that if you have too much up there, it's going to splatter anyway and get distorted. We've even tested this out I remember with Hobson, you know, Classic Records, we were having Ella Fitzgerald, we were remastering Ella Fitzgerald, and we were getting sibilant S's. They wouldn't track clean. So we said, well, hey, let's try it at 78.
Oh, wow.
And see what it sounds like. See if it's clean. Let's make sure it's not the cutting system. So we ran it at 78 and it was clean as could be.
Oh, wow.
I mean, her S's were totally clean. And which means that the cartridge then was able to fit in there and keep good contact with the groove wall, because when it comes up against a very loud transient or a lot of high frequencies, it's like a huge obstacle course for the playback stylus, because high frequencies make the stylus, it has to move really fast. So if you have a lot of energy up there, you could have a problem either with the cartridge or with the cutting system. So nowadays, though, we don't really have that problem of high end, unless, I mean, if we do, it's usually not going to track well anyway. So a lot of times we'll have the problem more on the inner grooves.
Right.
So we'll have to do we have to do, the thing about vinyl is it can be incredibly good, but it has a certain amount of limitations.
Have you ever cut at half speed before in your career? Like, do you have any albums that are out that are cut at half speed? No, I don't think so.
I've never worked
Yeah.
on half speed. No.
Yeah.
So, we just have never even tried it. See, the problem with half speed is, and it might even be, I mean, if you do half speed, yeah, the top end is easier to cut because, 15,000 is now 7,500.
Right.
But 50 cycles is now 25. That's where the problem is. You can't, most tape machines won't play back 25 cycles, and you have to run the tape machine at half speed. And even the cutting systems don't like anything really low like that.
So very hard on the cutting systems.
Well, it's not hard on them. It's just that they just don't respond well way down that low. They're pretty good down to 50 cycles or 30 cycles. Pretty good. But you get something like a classical thing with real low stuff. You got at 30 cycles, you have to be at 15 now. Now you're having a real problem at half speed. So what did they do? They have to equalize it on the bottom. So there's some pretty hefty EQ on the bottom. And that's what everybody complained about. The bottom isn't as good because you're having to put all this electronics in to make it flat at half speed. So you run into, maybe somebody has done it better than other people that I've heard, but it was always a problem, the bottom end.
Well, I guess Stan Ricker from MoFi or Mobile Fidelity for years. I mean, he was sort of the one that started that in the early or mid to late 70s, right? So, I mean, some of his older stuff, I mean, I feel does sound quite good.
Oh, no, it's not that they don't sound clean.
Yeah.
No, they do sound clean. And it's just a lot of the complaints were just that it didn't match on the bottom end. But no, and back then it was beneficial.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it is something. I know Stan Ricker, though. I mean,
oh yeah,
I think he's passed away now. I think.
Yes, he has. Yes,
2 years ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was a good old audiophile, really. And he ended up saying that it really should be 3/4.
Interesting.
Yeah, he decided that it should be a little high. But he was a tinkerer. Yeah, but he was tinkering in a different area than we do. I think it could drive you crazy cutting at half speed.
I think what is it? I think Abbey Road Studios does their half speed. They did it for some of the anniversary Beatle albums as well. I'm not sure if you ever heard those ones before.
Yeah, well, I don't think there was a lot of extreme high end on those anyway. So I don't know if there would be much of a reason to do
Interesting.
that. Now, certain things, yes. Certain things, fine.
Yeah.
But again, you can put in a top end that you're not going to be able to play back. You could put in, 15,000. You can put in 15,000 cycles now at a higher level, but on the disc when you're playing it back, it's going full speed. So now you're going to have a real deep cut on the higher frequencies that the stylus is going to have a hard time tracking. So it's not that you can just put on more high end now, but now can you play it back? And see, nowadays we can play back just about any high end that we want to. I mean, the cutting systems don't have as big a problem anymore with high frequencies, cutting high frequencies.
Mm-hmm.
So, and also the tube amplifiers back then, tube amplifiers don't have very good peak power. So, a lot of those amplifiers, they're only about 100 watts, 110, 120 watts maximum. And part of the problem was that they couldn't even cut a lot of high frequencies because the amplifier would clip. So that's why they went down to, so there was only 7,500 for 15,000 because of that curve. The RIAA curve.
All right, yeah.
Is asking it to put out a lot of power if there's high frequencies. Now, if you don't have the power and you don't have good peak power with tube amps, so there's all these factors that come into play here, and so we've tried to optimize our system in every way that we can. So that we don't go excessive in the extreme high end, because a lot of cutter heads aren't really linear at the real high frequencies. They have a hard time because they're mechanical. See, all this stuff it has a lot of big mechanical element in it. It's just like speakers. No two speakers sound alike, even if it's the same manufacturer, because it's a transducer for one thing. That's where the biggest problems are in transducers. When you're changing mechanical to electrical or electrical to mechanical, that's where the big problems are. That's the things that'll make the biggest difference in any sound system are the speakers, the playback cartridge. All of that stuff is the most important thing as far as giving you good sound.
And that was one of my questions I was going to ask you. So, I mean, number one, do you have a large record collection at home?
Well, I do, but I have sold a few of them because they were so valuable. You know, these old jazz records.
Oh, wow.
But I probably have only a couple thousand.
Okay.
You know?
And so what system do you play back your records on at home?
Well, now I have a basis turntable, which is a real high-end one, and it's got a Soundsmith cartridge, low output, but it's not a moving coil.
Ah.
But it's low output. It's a special design, but it's expensive. You know, it was given to me by a bassist, you know, because they loved the work I did and they just wanted me to have it.
Nice.
So I mean, it's a beautiful system, and it's got vacuum hold down if I use it. You know, it's got all those fancy things. I don't know how many tens of thousands of dollars it would have cost me to buy it.
Wow.
I didn't. You know, these audiophiles are pretty crazy. But I'll take the equipment if they want to give it to me.
Oh, for sure.
But yeah, and then I have two. My speakers are the Tannoy Westminsters, the really big ones.
Mm-hmm.
They gave me those too way back when I was endorsing Tannoy, because that's all we use here.
Oh, interesting.
However, they're all hot rodded too, just like everything else we do. I mean, we build our own crossovers. We do all of this stuff. We have our own way of configuring it. We use two different types of Tannoys to get the sound we want. We've listened to the tweeters and various ones because they're dual concentric speakers. And so it's like a Tannoy system you've probably never heard before. I mean, it's so neutral that it's brutal sometimes. If it's not a good recording, they sound terrible. But if it's a good recording, they come to life. They're not coloring the sound at all. They're extremely neutral. They're good for what we use, but they're very natural sounding. But a lot of speakers nowadays are very hypey. That even happened when they brought in years ago when they brought in Asia for me to master. I put it out and they said, we want to use these speakers we got from Germany, blah, 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 blah. And they're bookshelf speakers. And in those days, there weren't as many bookshelf speakers around. So I put those speakers in the system on the console, just in front of me. And I started playing back the music. And they sounded great. I said, you know, the problem is I wouldn't know what to do with this because it sounds good on these. You know, it's making it sound punchy. It's making it sound nice and open and clean. And I wouldn't even know. I said, let me hear it on my speakers. So I switched it up to mine and definitely it needed work. So I need something that's not going to kind of manufacture something that isn't really representative of most speakers out there. And there are speakers around like that like NS10s and things like that a lot of mixers use. They have a lot of sizzle on the top end. Like a lot of these dome tweeters sound like the tweeter's broken. You know, they're buzzy and sizzly and they give you the false sense of air and stuff like that. These are all compression tweeters in old Tannoys. These are old tapes. So these are very clean. You listen to anything on the top end, it's perfect. It sounds just like the instruments right there. So we can hear those differences, and it's good for mastering.
Right.
So we can really hear what we're doing when we turn the knobs. Because a lot of these speakers, you almost don't hear what you're doing. Now, if you get used to them, I've always said too that I could get used to anything. If I spend enough time with them, I'll know what they should sound like when it's good. But you shouldn't have to do that though. You should have something that's going to give you a good representation overall of what you're going to get, what people are going to get when they take it other places.
So when you go home at night after a long day of mastering, sit down, maybe with a glass of wine, what do you listen to?
I watch TV. I watch the news. I watch the news because of what's
Okay.
going on nowadays. I mean,
Why do you
it's
want to?
all
Why do you
news
want?
now.
Why do you want to
Well,
watch the news? That's depressing.
it is depressing, but I'm very curious about a lot
Yeah.
of things, though. And actually, I listen more when I'm getting. See, I have a listening room with a bathroom right open to it. So when I'm getting ready for work in the morning and taking a shower and all that stuff, I'm listening to my system. I'm right there where my big system is. And so but I'm usually playing CDs because they're so easy, you know, and I don't have to worry about keeping it clean and all that. So but most of the discs that I listen to are right here at the studio.
Okay.
Yeah, because we have really good playback systems, and I'll come in and I do a lot of checking on pressings and stuff that comes back from the factory, A/B with the originals. So I have all the originals. So a lot of the work is done just on stuff that we've worked on. We're kind of trying to make sure that we're getting back from the factory and so forth what we sent them, or that it hasn't gone downhill too far. See, we have a pretty good idea of which plants, about how far downhill it goes with each plant, and we know when they're off, when they're actually doing something wrong or something didn't go through right. But it's hard to keep up with that because it's a moving target also. It's like you can get one set of stampers that sound better than another set of stampers. So you have to be careful of all that stuff and make sure that you're with a good plant. And so because there's a wide range of quality out there.
I'm sure some of my viewers want to know your favorite music genre. I know at the top before we started recording, you were talking a little bit about that. Maybe we can go back to that when you moved from Minneapolis or Duluth to Phoenix when you were a young man.
Yeah, well, that was it. I mean, well, of course, I didn't really discover jazz right away, but you know, when I was about 14 is when I actually 14 or 15, because high fidelity was just in. There was no stereo records or anything then. And I was in Phoenix, of course, which there were no shopping centers. None of that stuff was going on. But I had this real kind of makeshift playback system in my house because I had my dad's 78s and stuff. But it was an old jukebox amplifier and speaker and it was like really primitive. But I you know, when LPs came in, I was buying, you know, big band records because that's what I heard on my dad's 78s. I listened to pop music on the radio here and there, but I was more impressed with big band music and that kind of feeling, you know. But my experience is that I was going to this record store down in Phoenix. There was only one main record store, and I was buying what I knew, you know, like Billy May or Les Brown, big orchestras, you know, just big bands. So I was doing that. I was buying those albums, those LPs when LPs first came in. But then there was this, I was looking for a film library in the summertime. And I was, I had this motor scooter that I was riding. You could get away with this in Phoenix when you were only 14. I had like one of those old Cushman motor scooters, and it was this little strip mall of about 4 stores, one of the first little shopping centers. But you know, you just go off the highway and just park in front. But there was this shop that said high fidelity sound system, and with me, I can't not notice that. You know, and I see through the window all these speakers sitting out because they were doing hobbies. Guys would buy cabinets and put them together, or they would finish their own cabinets and put their own. I mean, there's a lot of this was going on, but I saw all this equipment and I thought, oh, I got to stop in there because I'm just one of these people that when I see something like that, it just grabs my attention.
Yeah.
So I pulled in and I went in and I was talking to the guy and I was looking, the Mac 30s were out then. Macintosh 30-watt amplifiers, beautiful, you know.
Beautiful.
Black.
Sure.
It's one of the best sounding amplifiers they ever made too.
Do you still have one? Do you still have one?
Yeah, that's what I use at home.
Oh, wow.
A pair of Mac 30s.
Nice.
that have been refurbished by these guys that restore them. And so I'm walking around the store, and the guy says, "Hey, you want to hear anything? I'll play your record." And I thought, yeah, I'd like to hear it. Well, he put this record on, and it changed my life. I heard that. I could not believe that you could buy something and play it back and it would sound that good. I was just shocked.
What was the record?
It was Leroy Anderson, of all things, like
Oh,
pop
wow.
classics. Well,
Wow.
pop classics.
Yeah.
Like Bugler's Holiday and that kind of stuff. But it was nice because it was a lot of acoustical instrument, orchestral stuff and all that. But I mean, the sound though, I just was like, what? And so from that day on, all my money went to audio equipment. And even I was recording around Phoenix too at one point when I got a little older. But when I got a little more money here and there. But and then the second thing that happened to me was my dad would let me off downtown, and I would go to this record shop. And so one day I was looking at these albums, these big band albums. I was always doing that, but then I was looking at the jazz section where the big bands were as well. But there was this album that really looked interesting to me. It just something about it, the artwork on the cover. And also I looked at the back, and there was just the trumpet player, sax player, and this, just typical kind of jazz record that I didn't even know, because here I am in Phoenix, people don't know much about jazz there, at least at that time. Anyway, so I bought this record. I thought, I'm going to buy this record and just see what it is. I don't know what it is. So I took it home and I put it on shock number 2. When I put this on, I was totally shocked. I could not believe that anybody could play like that. I've never heard anything come close to me. It was Clifford Brown and Max Roach.
Oh, wow.
Study in Brown. It doesn't get any better when it comes to bebop. And it was so impressive that I was just beside myself. So the only thing, so from then on, and then I started working for that hi-fi shop too.
Oh, no kidding.
And the records he had there were contemporary records. And of course, that was perfect for me. That now I have good sound, incredible sound, and good jazz. So, so that's really my background and it's ironic that I've got a huge reputation in pop music, but of course, my favorite, of course, would be R&B, stuff that has a really good rhythmic feel.
So favorite R&B album?
Well, it would be a lot of Michael stuff, the stuff that Quincy did. Is the stuff that feels good. The thing to me is feel is extremely important. And that's what I like about bebop, because bebop has this beautiful balance when it's good between rhythmic feel and intellectual stimulation. Both of them are going simultaneously, whereas blues concentrates on feel. It's the basis of a lot of this stuff, but I get bored with it after a while because it doesn't really take you on much of a journey. Whereas bebop, a good solo, and not too many people can do it anymore, a good solo that has a cohesiveness and tells you a really important emotional story that's playing with the rhythm. It plays to the rhythm, old bebop stuff from the 50s and 60s. The rhythm is an extremely big part of it. So they're playing off the rhythm as well. You're going on a trip, a nice abstraction of the tune, and you're looking at it from all these different points of view, but it all makes sense, and you feel that tune in the background all the time. That's good bebop.
Wow. One last question. Where do you see this industry in 5 years from now as we see a next generation of mastering engineers? I mean, what are your thoughts on where things are going to go? We've seen it obviously over the last few years with the pandemic. We've seen a huge increase in vinyl sales, where it's basically sold more than the CD for the first time since like the mid 1980s. Do we see this continuing? Like, where are you seeing in the industry right now, being right there?
I think that, here's the thing. A lot of these formats have a place because like vinyls can sound, it's capable of doing a lot, but it does have limitations, but it's capable of creating the most natural sound in a way. because it's so simplified if you do it right. But not too many people do now. You know, a lot of the records out there are just the CD file is cut on the disc because they know people like the disc, they like the package, they like the picture, they like the connection with the artist in that way. So because it's just popular, and a lot of people have this perception because of what they've been told, is that it's all warmer and it's this and that. And they're talking about what it used to be, and it still can be, but it has to be done right. It's not just the vinyl that's causing that. It's the recordings that were put on vinyl. So we have to definitely refer to that and realize that the vinyl is only going to be as good as what you're sending it. So, you know, the recording has to be really natural and realistic and so forth. So to me, it seems like digital is probably going to keep being a big part of this because it's so much easier to record in it and control the sound and so forth. Almost all this stuff that comes out on vinyl now, new stuff, is really the original tracks were digital. And so they mix it on an analog board, though. Those are the best things right now. Because you can keep all of the tracks separate and all that, they don't, no crosstalk, nothing like that. See, let me say one thing about digital. The problem with digital is that it's a really good storage medium. So the computer is controlling everything, and you've got a program that you can put all these different instruments on different tracks and the vocal and all this stuff. So when you're recording it, you can get pretty good sound on all those different tracks. You used to have a lot of crosstalk and various problems with analog when you had a multi-track. But so as a storage medium of all the tracks, digital is pretty good if you have high resolution. Now, the problem is, this is an inherent problem with digital. You cannot manipulate the sound in any way without losing quality.
Right.
So you can't take one of those tracks and raise the level a tenth of a dB. You'll hear a difference. Or you can't do anything that works on levels, like equalization does. Level itself, compression, anything, any kind of processing and stuff like that, you're going to change the actual math in the whole thing. It's no longer the same signal it was, and it's degraded. So I can do that. I could take any track that I have, and I could take it down a tenth of a dB, and then have you listen to the difference, and you'll hear a difference.
Oh, wow.
It's not as good. You start losing some of that ambience. You start losing the naturalness of it. So a lot of what people don't like about digital is that it's a digital signal that's been manipulated a lot.
Right.
And that's where you start running into all this edginess, harshness, graininess. All this stuff starts to happen. But you have a lot of control over it. So they like that. But when you use an analog board, those are usually the best recordings. You do all the manipulation in the analog domain. See, it's like what we do here. When we're equalizing recordings and various things, we're doing it on an analog board. So we don't like digital equalizers. So we have our own that we build that are analog. So everything that comes in here gets changed to analog. And then we manipulate the sound in the analog domain, and then we send it back to our final computer that has the final product.
So the old SPAR code, so for instance, you might get a digital file in, but it would be a D, and then it would be an A for your analog mixing. And then if it would be cut to vinyl, it would be another A. Is that how that would work?
They only, when they came up with that, I think they, I think they were just going by.
It was for the CD industry at the time.
The CD, yeah, they had those, but usually they were talking about, I don't know whether they considered the mastering part as part of those letters.
Oh, okay.
It's hard to say because we use both actually.
Okay.
Especially with pop music, because it has to be converted back to digital. So and if we need to use compression or limiting, Digital limiters are better than
Mhm.
analog ones. They're just faster. They can do some of this pop stuff where they want really punchy stuff or loud stuff. So we'll use a combination a lot of times. So all of this stuff has a lot to do with what market it's destined for. We have to think about that. Like analog stuff, we don't want anything in. We want it as clean and pure as
Clean.
possible. And
Absolutely.
if we need to do anything, we want to do just the minimum amount that we need to do as far as signal path change. So it all depends on the market and what you're competing with and so forth. Because if you're making it only for streaming, you want it to be kind of in the ballpark with everything else, so yours doesn't sound so different. Because if somebody's on their computer and on their cell phone and all this stuff, and they got the music going in the background, streaming it, or they're just doing a playlist, if your tune is way low in level or something, they're going to think something's wrong with your tune.
Right.
When if you turned it up, it would sound better. So yeah, you have to think about where these things are going to end up. And they are too. They're always worried about that, about how it's matching up with other stuff that they're competing with. But when it comes to audiophile stuff, it's just you're competing with quality. So, and that's why that's my first love.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is an audiophile YouTube channel that you're on. So, I mean, I love audiophile myself. And I was going to mention to you, my very first record, I can't remember if I told you, it's the top was Pretty in Pink that you mastered back in '86. If you remember doing that one.
Oh yeah,
that was a fantastic soundtrack in its day. I mean, that brought in, I think it was In Excess was on there, Psychedelic Furs, if you remember them, Suzanne Vega.
Yeah, those were, I remember that now.
Great album. Great album.
Yeah, and there are a lot of, back then though, I don't know if they used as many gimmicky things and stuff that they do nowadays, because a lot of this stuff, the quality is kind of poor. They've done so much processing and stuff. But a lot of the older stuff, even though it was digital, some of it was actually pretty good. Or there was more of a combination between analog and digital.
So the Pretty in Pink soundtrack, would they have given you an analog tape?
That was probably a tape, yeah.
It was, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. So, I mean, it is the best if you can stay in the analog domain and only do it at the last stage when you're making a CD or something.
Mhm.
Because, look, one of the weakest link, unfortunately, is the computer itself. Because the computer and the program you use to set up these things and so forth, in itself degrades the sound. You don't even have to manipulate it. I can listen through the computer being converted back to analog, and I can get a sound that I think is really great. Then when I record it on the hard drive in the computer, it's not as good. It definitely makes, and it's a noticeable difference. So it's just, I've never been able to record anything that's as good as what I hear off of my monitors. It just doesn't, except on a disc. Except on a disc, I can do that.
Yeah.
The pressing isn't quite as good.
Right.
So again, how do we get to the consumer what we're hearing? And we're closer all the time. I think we're doing better, especially like now that's why they're putting out these one steps and so forth. It's a little better, but boy, it's so hard to get to exactly that perfection that you're looking for.
It's probably a never ending for audiophiles
like
to get that
else.
perfection.
It's like anything else. You can go out there and buy a pretty good sound system now for not a huge amount of money, and you're going to probably get 80% of the sound.
Yeah.
That next 10% or 20% is going to be expensive.
Oh yeah.
It's just like anything else. When they were trying to do 0 to 60 in 5 seconds or whatever, they could do things like that, but to get another second,
multi-millions of dollars.
Yeah, millions.
Yeah.
It's just anything's that way. That way. You can get the basic whatever it is at a reasonable price, but to go that next step, wow, look out.
Oh. Well, thank you so much. And
Sure.
When are you going to come up to Vancouver?
Oh God, I don't know. we used to go up to Seattle all the time, but we just haven't been traveling. My wife and I haven't been traveling at all for all this pandemic period.
Yeah.
We're just being very careful.
They've got some lovely cruises here. You go to Alaska from Vancouver. It's just
Yeah,
incredible.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of things. Well, maybe, I don't know. It's hard to say, but we do like to go up to Seattle so that it's right close by.
Yeah.
It's true, we could do that.
Well, I thank you so much. I'd love to do this again with you at some point, if you wouldn't mind. I had really enjoyed my time with you. Yeah, it'd be great. And tell Chase, thank you again. He was great putting this all together for us. So thank you so much.
Yeah, he's the best.
Yeah. Have a good one. Thank you again, Bernie.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.